Hello, everyone. I am Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of BeatingTrauma.com. And I am here today to talk specifically about recovery and specifically about what happens when we start to build awareness and how it can sometimes feel like we're living in a world that just doesn't support or suit that particular level of awareness. And all of not only the feelings that can come up because of that, but I also want to talk some about how we can cope with it. Now, for those of you who've been in this place for a long time, none of the coping strategies are going to be truly shocking to you. But sometimes it can be good to reiterate this and also to let people know that you're not alone in having to deal with these things. So I want to talk about this today, particularly and especially because of the events of the last week. I think that this is coming up for a lot of people right now, and it's a bit of a crisis in general. So we'll talk about it a little bit. I want to say hi to Carol. Thank you for being here. So living in a world that doesn't suit our level of awareness. Now, this discussion is not about superiority. I want to be really clear. I am not here to say that people who have awareness are better than other people. Now, that said, we are going to have superior parts in our system. Those exist, and it's really good to write from that feeling. But that's not really where I'm going with the discussion. It can also be a situation where we feel inferiority from a standpoint of when we are feeling really different from a lot of the people around us, we can then start to think that we are inferior. And the controller will especially tell us things like that when we are experiencing maybe more emotions than the average person, or we're not tolerating abusive environments as well as other people. So we will sometimes kind of hear from parts that say this is actually an inferior thing as well. But I also want to stress that this is also not about spiritual bypass, because I think sometimes with spiritual bypass there is this sense of superiority, which is one of the ways we know that we are not grounded, by the way. And that's not really where I'm trying to go today either. So this is, it's not about the superiority or inferiority associated with feeling like this world is just not on the same level of awareness as you. But those are very important components that we do want to try to do some writing from if we feel that stuff is coming up for us. I want to talk about the reality. The reality in some ways around this is enough. But I'm going to break this down. I'm going to talk about two really challenging realities around kind of waking up or becoming more aware than probably the people that are around you, and what that kind of feels like to us. This baby, sorry, I just had a little disconnect. So you may already be completely aware of these things, but we're going to talk about it so that we can feel like we're not alone in this one. The first one is that coming out of denial is brutal. Okay, it really is brutal. You already know this certainly on an individual level. Like when you start bringing awareness of the truth of your story to yourself, that also means you're going to start to become more aware of the truth associated with the world's story. Okay? And I'll be honest, the world's story is like our story times a million, right? Like it's a bigger problem, right? It's our story, and then all of the other stories that we start to be able to see so much more clearly. And I'll be honest, the real truth, both for ourselves and for the world, is hard to take in, right? I mean, it's hard enough just to take in that story as it relates to us. Most of the time, we are in denial by the time we get to our adult years, and that's because that story was just not something we could cope with. But then when we start looking at that story and then thinking about how prevalent it is, right? Like how prevalent, how much more common, like for example, the fact that trauma is much more common, because sometimes when we start to heal, we think we're the only ones that have this issue. As a matter of fact, it's a typical defense mechanism in our system to feel like we're the only ones with this trauma. And we use that to put ourselves down and isolate ourselves. And that's another part of our journey to healing. But in reality, when we start really waking up and coming out of denial, we recognize that that is like everywhere. And there's a lot of people in the world who are dealing with this kind of stuff. And it's having a major impact, not only on how people live, but the choices they are making individually and the collective choices they are making. And we start to see how survival is actually at the forefront of most people's decisions. And I'll be honest, even as we are healing, we are still going to act from survival a lot of the time. This is a process and it takes a lot of time. But the survival approach that people are often taking means that they are going to be repeating their trauma patterns, right? A lot. And, they're going to be kind of having very similar life experiences over and over again. This also means, and I talk about this all the time, so this is no news to any of you, that dissociation is everywhere, right? Dissociation is everywhere. Survival is everywhere. Repeating trauma patterns is everywhere. And collective decisions based on these things are everywhere. And when we see that, that's like coming out of denial on a much bigger level. And I'll be honest, that can be pretty futility inducing to see that. Okay, so this is hard, right? Like this is hard stuff that we're talking about. I want to say hi to Trish. Thank you for being here, and to Bernadette as well. Let's see, Bernadette is saying I'm in chronic survival fear, chronic can't connect even though I want to barely make call go out. Is that a defense against pain? Yes, I think you are solidly defending against your trauma right now. And what would benefit you the most when you can do it is to do some writing from the parts that don't want to feel. Chronic pain does tend to have an association with blocked emotions in our system, usually quite a lot of blocked emotion in the system. So definitely when you can, start trying to kind of ground into the body and write from those defenders who are blocking, because we think that these defenses are helpful, but in fact they are holding us back and keeping us in a really stuck place. Work with that. Hi Christy, good to see you here. Thank you for being here. So let's talk about the next one. So I talked about the first reality of waking up and becoming more aware than a lot of the people in this world, is that there's a painful truth associated with that. And coming out of that denial, it takes some time, and it doesn't feel really great, I'll be honest. And I know you guys know that recognizing the world we're living in today is yucky and hard work, but it's important that we do it. The second one I want to talk about is that living a really aware life is very lonely. Okay. The truth is that people they're not just not understanding us. Like, they are committed to not understand our perspective on things. It's not just a simple, they don't get it. There is literally, now on an unconscious level, a deep, deep commitment to not understanding our perspective and to avoiding altogether any kind of perspective like ours, especially in their own lives. Remember that a lot of the invalidation we experience is actually coming from people who are projecting their need to continue to not look at things onto us. So when we drop out of the controller, who is the primary projector when it comes to invalidation, people will want us back in the controller. They will want that for us. And they may really push pretty hard to get us there. The problem is oftentimes we still have a relatively unhealed love seeker that we're working on, but when that love seeker is active, we are kind of desperately searching for someone to validate our experiences, and it can be really, really hard to find. And we may find that really the only kind of conversations we can have, especially with a lot of people who have been in our lives before now, are kind of surfacey. Like we can't really get where we want to be as far as expressing like the full level of our awareness and our emotional understanding with most people. Okay, and the truth is that doesn't feel particularly fulfilling, right? When we finally are recognizing our truth and nobody really has a deep interest in discussing it with us. That's very, very difficult. And I have talked often before about how recovery and awareness and emotional connection feels very lonely. And that is true. It does. Now, part of that loneliness is a flashback. When it feels really, really desperate, that's the love seeker, and that is a flashback. But the general sense of aloneness that comes with this process is very real, and we need to acknowledge it, right? So for sure, most people in our lives, especially prior to our recovery work, will not get it, because when we are enmeshed with a controller, we will have a tendency to... Okay, so I just clicked out again. I don't know why this has been happening the last couple of weeks so much, but for sure, when we are not recovered, when we are very controller enmeshed, we are going to attract into our space people who are also controller enmeshed. Not to mention our family of origin is usually pretty controller enmeshed as well. So I will say that a big part of our journey is recognizing that quality is much more important than quantity when it comes to our relationships. This is not what's preached by society. But again, this recovery work is so often goes against almost everything that society tells us. Another reason why it's so lonely, because most of the people around us, most of the people in our communities and society in general are pushing to live life the way society tells us to live it, right? That's not what our new awareness is telling us to do. Following ourselves instead of all of this pressure that's coming from society is a lonely process. That is absolute. And that really stinks. I'm not going to lie. It does. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we cope with that, right? Like, what do we do? Okay, so we know that coming out of denial is extremely difficult. And it shows us a world that we really didn't want to see, that we were kind of telling ourselves stories about. But it's also quite lonely. So how do we cope? How do we cope being in a world where we're becoming more aware and the rest of the world around us is making survival decisions and repeating trauma patterns? And we can see it. We can see that it's happening. So the first thing we want to do is we want to start putting people in categories, okay? This requires discernment, and this does require us to ground out of the normal isolator love seeker swing, where we're either all the way over here and everybody is awful, or we're all the way over here and everybody is our savior, right? We need to start putting people in categories. And this may sound like kind of cold-hearted when you hear me say it. You might be thinking, why would I want to do that? But we need to know who's our safe people, right? Who can we talk to in depth about this kind of work, right? Who are our semi-safe people, right? Where maybe we can plant some seeds. Maybe we can get a little bit deep with them. Maybe we can start. We could go to a certain point with them, or maybe we can only go to that point with them sometimes, depending on their state. And then we're going to have our extremely unsafe people who all you do is start to speak about emotions and they move on to that invalidation train, and there is absolutely no benefit that comes to discussing anything other than the weather with that person. So we need to put these people in their categories, and we need to really, really understand who those people are. And I'm going to be really honest with you right now, okay? You're going to have very, very few safe people, okay? Like, the number is going to be incredibly small, okay? You may have a fair number of people who can tolerate it to a degree. And you'll have tons of people who are truly unsafe. But again, we're going for quality, not quantity here, right? So start putting your people in categories, and when you're around the unsafe people, oh my goodness, don't let that love seeker out, right? These are the times when we want to have a lot of awareness going in our system about parts that might become active when we're around certain categories of people, because we need to process that love seeker. We need to write from them. We need to feel their grief. We need to feel that desperation, but we do not need to let them out around the unsafe people, for sure. Trisha's saying, yes, the lack of people to have real conversations with is one of the hardest parts of this work for me. I honestly believe it is one of the hardest parts for almost everybody that I work with. So you are not alone in that. That is real. And we can't ignore it and pretend it's not there. But I will say it's also not a reason to go back to the way we were, because that was horrible, right? But there will be parts that try to convince us that it's a good idea, but it's not. So the next one. Okay, don't always listen to the parts of the system saying, I don't belong here. Those are particular messages that will show up for us and say, I can't exist on this earth and be this aware. Now, there's going to be several parts that can come at you with that message for different reasons. You do want to write from that message. Definitely write from that message, but don't let them convince you that you don't belong here, because if there is one thing we need, it's more of us. Okay, so I really, really stress the importance of that. But listen to it from a standpoint of writing from it. Let it express itself. It's usually going to have a pretty strong fear element to it when it comes out. Let that happen, but also know that, no, you are here and you are becoming more aware for a very important reason. Again, I don't know what that reason is right now for each individual person, but there's a reason for it. The next one. Look for places where you can fit and maybe even help a bit. Okay, important point. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit for it to be helpful. Okay, I really want to stress this, because a lot of times we will sort of outcast ourselves by saying that it's not a perfect fit, that we have differences with people. Yes, we are always going to have differences with people. This is about bringing in discernment and saying, is this difference an absolute no-go, right? Go, no-go is a decision. That's coming from my project management days. But the idea sort of fits here, right? Yes, you're going to have people where it's like, no-go, right? But a lot of times we are highlighting the differences between us and other people as an attempt to protect ourselves, as an attempt to isolate ourselves, but also as an attempt to outcast ourselves. So there's different reasons and different parts that will come forward with this intention. We want to write from it, but recognize that those differences don't mean that there isn't a place for us in that particular setting. So look for a way that you can plant seeds. This is the next one here. The truth is that direct discussions about our awareness can in fact shut other people down. Like, if you start talking about how you're connecting with your emotions and you're discovering and you're retrieving memories, and the person across from you, you may just see them go, like, they just might blank out. By the way, it's really good to start watching for dissociation when you can, because when you start to see it, it's really obvious how much of it exists in the world. But you may see people blank out when you come in with your hardcore understanding, which is not wrong. It's actually desperately needed. But most people can't take a direct shot like that. They will move into controller and they will start dissociating. And the next thing they may do is also start invalidating you. So work on planting seeds. These are little tiny bits of information that. So I just clicked off again, so I'll just say little tiny bits of information you could just leave with them. Like, if they say something to you like, oh yeah, sometimes I get emotional, but there's no time or place for that. I just shut it down. Right? Okay. That's what they've told you, right? And so yes, you can plant a seed that might say something like, oh, if that emotion is there, it's probably not going anywhere, yeah. If you have time at any point, you might want to give that a chance to express. And that's it. Change the subject. Move on. Don't spend another moment on it. Now, if they bring it back to that same conversation, what do you mean give it a little time to express? Okay. Like, they're inviting you to give them a little bit more. But planting seeds can be one of the best ways to begin to let the other person know that there's another perspective they could have on something. And that's enough. Again, oftentimes if you take it too far, they wind up in controller and they're gone. And you're not gonna get anywhere with that, really. So the next thing, keep your boundaries strong. Honestly, this has been my number one learning that has come out of my entire healing journey. Keep the boundaries strong. You are not here to save anyone but yourself. Okay? I cannot stress this enough. It is really tempting for us to meet someone who we can tell, because of all the work we've done on ourselves, is really suffering, is really dissociating, is really not here. It is so tempting to want to save them. And obviously in the work that I do, and I think this is true for a lot of helpers and coaches out there, that deep desire to save people can make it a bit of a struggle to have the boundaries we need to have and to protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. And maybe safe is the wrong word. I mean, like emotionally safe, like able to take care of ourselves instead of putting all our focus on others. Because the truth is, we have been taught from a very young age to focus on others, and focusing on self can be really difficult. So keep those boundaries strong. Not your job to save people. And I'll be honest, a lot of love seekers out there are looking for saving. And so we have to find a way to do it that is kind, not nice. Nice means no boundaries. Kind, but also make sure that we're keeping ourselves like in a good place. Because the truth is, we're not going to be any help to anybody if we've completely lost ourselves in our attempts to save others. It's not going to be good. So, and then the last thing I want to leave you with may shock you, may not, I don't know. But despite its reputation, I will say that the internet has facilitated massive amounts of healing just through the simple act of providing a way for people to connect with each other from all over the world who have similar perspectives and similar journeys. Keep using it to find your people. I know those aren't in-person people, but I will say that I think the reason trauma recovery has come as far as it has is because of this ability to connect with people all around the world who have had surprisingly similar experiences to us. So while, yes, the internet gets a lot of grief from a lot of places, and yes, the internet can also be used to distract ourselves and keep ourselves from connecting to self, find those places where you can hear from others who can give you a little bit of validation about your journey and about what you're doing. Um, Obviously, my page is one of those places. There are many pages now that are really speaking the truth about trauma recovery in ways that are absolutely wonderful. So find those places, get those little tiny bits of support. Sometimes that's all we're getting, just getting these little breadcrumbs, but they're helpful. They can help keep us out of the controller, out of that sort of societal pressure, and focused on connecting with self, which is ultimately what we're wanting to do here. So let's see. Yeah, and Shabnam is saying yes, but done very subtly. So this is about the planting the seeds. If it's done very subtly at the right time, can trigger some moments of awakening in others. Absolutely, it can. I use this every day. The seed planting, and I do it. Obviously, I do it with my clients. They're a lot more receptive to seed planting, but I will do it with others who I interact with who are not on any kind of journey like this, but just because of the energy I carry, do have a tendency to tell me a little bit more about themselves than they might do with an average person. That's an energetic thing. And so I can use it with them too. And I find that to be potentially really helpful. I mean, some of these people I don't know. I don't know that they're going to take my seed and run with it, but at least I know that I've had an interaction that feels good to me and feels like a quality interaction to me, and that's important. Carol is saying, thanks for this. So validating and supporting for such a lonely journey, right? This is the loneliest of journeys. I mean, okay, let me just say that it was probably lonelier when we were children. Okay, to be fair, let's say that. This is the second most lonely journey that there is. And it's the one we're in right now. So it's important to acknowledge it. I hear this from people almost every day. And it's true and it's real. And I hate to say this, but in a sense, your loneliness is, you're not alone in your loneliness, I guess is what I'll say about that. I find it's happening to most of us to some degree. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Shannon. I am just wanting to punch my phone right now because I keep losing the signal. So I hope this is okay and it's not creating too many problems on your end. But thank you all, and I look forward to talking to you next Tuesday. Thank you again for coming today and chatting with me.